Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. My name's Matthew Ellis. I teach history at Ohio State University. 10:30 Thursday morning, I was halfway through a lecture on Reconstruction politics when it happened. The first odd thing I noticed was how many students were looking at their laps, not scribbling notes, not zoned out, staring at their phones. I saw the glow bouncing off their hands and sleeves. One of the phones buzzed so loud it startled the kid holding it. That's when I felt mine vibrate in my coat pocket under the desk. It wasn't a text, not a call. It was an alert. One of those high-priority government push notifications with the red banner and loud tone. I pulled it up. It didn't say where or what exactly. Just 5 words in all caps. Emergency alert. Biological threat detected. Underneath it, in smaller font, seek shelter immediately. That was it. No map, no location, no press conference link, no follow-up. The Learn More button underneath didn't load. I stood still for maybe 3 seconds, just reading it twice to be sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. Students had already begun packing up. Some moved toward the door like they expected fire alarms to go off next. Nobody was panicking yet, but you could feel the shift. Like the class had ended early for some reason. Everyone pretended to understand, but nobody really did. I told them to slow down, told them we'd walk together. Not because I had authority, because I didn't want 50 people rushing out and triggering something worse. We crossed the oval toward RPAC, the big university gym where emergency trainings and drills usually take place. A few faculty from nearby buildings were doing the same, herding their students like field trip leaders. I made eye contact with a philosophy professor I recognized. He gave me a quick shake of the head like, I don't know either. RPAC was already open. Emergency lights were on, but the overheads hadn't been switched. Students sat in clusters on the floor, and the bleachers were pulled out. Everyone was either whispering, texting, or filming videos. I heard someone ask if it was another test run or active shooter drill. Nobody had real information. A few staff from campus safety stood near the doors, but didn't seem to know more than the rest of us. I tried pulling up the university emergency page. Nothing but a loading spinner. Around 11:30, 2 Columbus PD cruisers rolled up. One officer in plain uniform came in and asked to speak to someone in charge. A few minutes later, the intercom cracked on, and a nervous voice told everyone that, quote, the threat is under active investigation. We were told to calmly return to our homes or dormitories. Campus activities were suspended for the remainder of the day. Students without local housing were to speak to volunteers near the exits. No other details. The walk back felt slower. Nobody said much. People walked in small groups, whispering to each other or holding their phones in front of their faces. Some were crying. Some were laughing like it was a joke. I saw a freshman with a lacrosse hoodie pull out a protein bar like it was just another break between classes. Nothing had happened yet, but everyone could feel the pressure building. When I got home, the street was quiet. My place is a 2-bedroom just north of campus. I live alone. My wife and kids were overseas at the time. She had flown to Lisbon for a friend's wedding. They left 4 days ago. I dropped my keys on the counter and immediately pulled out my phone to call her. The call connected on the second try. She answered right away. Her voice sounded normal, calm. She said they were still at the hotel, and everything felt perfectly fine over there. She hadn't seen any alerts. No international warnings. Airports still open. Flights still on schedule. I told her to delay coming home. I didn't yell. I didn't panic. I just said it would be smarter to wait until we knew more. She agreed. Said she'd try to move the return flight back by a few days and would check in again at night. After that, I walked the house and started wiping down all the doorknobs and handles with the last of our disinfecting wipes. Not because anyone had been here, just instinct. I checked our supply closet. 1 large pack of toilet paper, half a case of bottled water, 3 cans of beans, a forgotten box of rice I bought before the semester started. That was it. I took out a legal pad and started writing a list. Not full-on prepper mode, just trying to be ready for a few days of uncertainty. I realized then I didn't even have a thermometer in the house. The Tylenol was expired. There was no rubbing alcohol. I hadn't needed any of those things for months, and now they suddenly mattered. I wrote them down, double underlined medicine. If the stores were still open the next morning, I was going early. At 4:15 in the afternoon, the university sent a mass email. All in-person classes suspended until further notice. Remote instruction to begin within 72 hours. Residence halls would remain open with modified operations. It didn't mention the nature of the threat or any confirmed incident, just that students should minimize movement and avoid large gatherings. Not long after that, a second government alert hit my phone. This time it said, "Remain indoors. Biological threat active. Still no details." I tried the news. Local stations looped the same anchor footage. CNN showed nothing but speculation. Social media was a disaster. Hashtags about monkeys, viruses, terrorism, water supply attacks. Nothing from the CDC. No names, no locations, no confirmed numbers. Just anonymous videos. One clip claimed to show a man foaming at the mouth on a sidewalk in Denver. Another said monkeys escaped a research facility in Florida. None of it looked reliable. Dinner was frozen pizza and canned peas. I didn't feel like eating, but forced myself. I sat at the kitchen counter and chewed slowly, watching the trees outside move in the wind. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't need noise. I just needed to stay still and think. Around 9, I filled 2 buckets with water and set them in the bathtub. If the grid failed or the water pressure dropped, I'd at least have something. I knew it wouldn't solve anything long term, but I was thinking in hours, not days. I checked the locks twice. I made sure every window was sealed. I took the garbage out, then sprayed down the doorknob with the last of my sanitizer spray. I called my wife again just after 10. She had managed to change the flight to next week. The hotel was letting them stay a few extra nights. The kids were asleep. She said they'd been swimming and watching movies. No sign of panic, no health warnings. She asked if I had seen anything weird myself. I told her no. Just the alerts and the silence that followed. I said goodnight and told her I'd check in tomorrow. She told me to stay calm and stop reading every post online. She was right, but I didn't listen. That night I laid in bed with my phone screen dimmed. I refreshed the same 5 tabs until I realized my eyes were hurting. I didn't sleep much, not because I was terrified, but because I couldn't figure out if what I had seen today was the start of something, or nothing at all. When morning came, the silence outside felt strange. No garbage trucks, no mail carrier, no dog walkers or leaf blowers. I rolled out of bed slower than usual and stood by the front window, waiting for some kind of sound that would pull the city back into motion. But the street was still. There were a few parked cars, lights on inside neighboring houses, but no one moving around. I checked my phone and saw another alert from the city had come through around 6 in the morning. It said a public health advisory was in effect for Franklin County. Not a lockdown, not a shelter in place, just a warning that potential biological exposure had been reported in multiple states, including Ohio, and that residents should minimize time outside their homes. It included the usual bullet points: frequent hand washing, social distancing, covering your mouth if you sneeze, don't touch your eyes. A link at the bottom went to a list of precautionary behavior guidelines. No confirmed details, no confirmed numbers. I stood in the kitchen and made coffee without thinking about it. I kept the radio on low in the background. NPR was looping interviews with medical experts. Every third sentence was a repeat of the one before. One doctor said the illness didn't appear to be bacterial, and that early indications pointed to a fast-spreading viral agent transmitted through saliva or droplets. Another said it might be something environmental or synthetic. None of them were sure. I didn't hear the word pandemic, not yet, but I heard multi-state clusters. I heard rapid deterioration. I heard symptoms include eye hemorrhaging and neurological collapse. That one made me stop chewing mid-bite. At 9:15, I walked to my car. I brought a pair of nitrile gloves I had left over from a painting project last fall. I pulled them on before touching the door handle. That's when I realized I hadn't seen a single person on the street. There were cars parked, a few lights on inside, but no footsteps, no dogs, no college kids jogging with earbuds, just parked silence. I headed toward the Kroger down on King Avenue. I expected it to be quiet. It wasn't. The parking lot was almost full, and there were people outside with carts already. Inside, the mood was tense but controlled. Shoppers moved fast. No music playing, no employees chatting. There was no toilet paper in the usual aisle. Paper towels gone. Most of the bleach section cleared out. The canned soup shelf was half empty, but it hadn't collapsed into chaos. People still queued up at the register. Nobody shouted. Nobody ran. Most of them wore masks now. Surgical ones, painter masks, scarves. Anything. I used a cloth sleeve over my face, folded twice. I moved methodically. Shelf-stable goods first. Pasta, rice, peanut butter, beans, dry oats. Then over to cleaning supplies. 2 large jugs of bleach, 3 boxes of trash bags, a bottle of dish soap, and 4 cans of Lysol, which the cashier told me would be limited to 2 per person. She looked me in the eye as she said it, like she had said it 20 times already that morning. I nodded. I didn't argue. On the way out, I stopped by the pharmacy window. A woman ahead of me asked if they had any surgical masks or gloves. The pharmacist didn't look up. He just said they were out. And no, they didn't know when more would arrive. The woman muttered something and left. I asked for a thermometer and Tylenol. They had both, and I paid in cash. Back at home, I wiped everything down before bringing it inside. Bleach spray for the plastic, soap and hot water for the rest. I didn't know if it made a difference. I wasn't taking chances. After that, I spent the next 30 minutes rearranging the pantry and stacking items in a more logical order. Meals that didn't require cooking went to the top. Bulk items got labeled. Water got rotated to the lower cabinet. It wasn't some elaborate prepper bunker setup. It was a corner of a 2-bedroom house, but it made me feel a little more in control. At noon, Columbus City officials held a press conference. I watched it live on the city's YouTube channel. The mayor stood behind a plexiglass shield. Her voice was flat. She confirmed that several probable cases had been reported within the state, including at least 2 in our county. She emphasized that they were still awaiting CDC confirmation, but that local hospitals had begun implementing isolation protocols. She did not say what caused the illness. She did not say how many had died. When reporters asked if it was a virus, she said the term being used was biological exposure with acute hemorrhagic symptoms. That was the first time I heard the word hemorrhagic used officially. It stuck in my mind. It wasn't flu. It wasn't food poisoning. It was something that caused blood vessels to rupture. On the surface, behind the eyes, in the mouth. I didn't eat lunch after that. I just poured another glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the edge of the fridge, trying to decide how seriously to take it. By mid-afternoon, I got 5 new emails from students. 2 asked if the course would still be pass-fail if the semester moved online. 1 wanted an extension on a paper. Another asked if I thought the university would close the dorms. The last one caught my attention. A student named Preston emailed a link to a forum post. It claimed a primate lab in Tennessee had suffered a containment breach 3 weeks ago, and that the animals had shown early signs of erratic behavior. I didn't click the link. I replied thanking him for sharing, but said I'd only be passing along verified information for now. I included 2 PDFs from the Department of Public Health. I didn't want rumors spreading under my name. Ohio State sent a follow-up notice around 4. They were strongly urging reduced occupancy in all common spaces, no more study groups in lounges, dining halls would operate carry-out only, gyms closed, no more office hours in person, remote instruction would begin in stages. Faculty were advised to prepare online materials over the weekend. I walked outside to the mailbox just before sundown. That's when I saw my neighbor 2 doors down, Mrs. Lasky, standing on her porch. She's 82, lives alone. I waved, then walked over, stopping halfway up her walkway. She asked if I had heard the news. I said yes. I asked if she needed anything. She said she was all right but might run out of milk soon. I told her I had a spare gallon. and could leave it by her door in the morning. She asked if I wanted her landline number in case anything went wrong. I nodded. She came back a minute later with a small notepad sheet and handed it to me from 6 feet away. We didn't talk long. She said she needed to feed the cats. I said I'd check in again soon. Later that evening, the first real footage hit the national news. Not rumors, not phone camera clips from overseas. NBC ran a story showing patients wheeled out of a hospital in Pennsylvania. Paramedics wore full suits. The reporter said symptoms had escalated within 24 hours, starting with fever and disorientation, followed by heavy bleeding from the nose and ears. Death occurred in most cases within 36 to 48 hours. They didn't say what percentage survived. That's when the timeline hit me. If it could incubate that fast and turn fatal that quick, then there had to be more of it already out there. People could be walking around infected without knowing it, talking, shopping, breathing next to someone in line. I shut the blinds, locked the side door, set up the spare bedroom as a makeshift isolation zone, put a cot inside, dragged a folding table over, set a trash bin next to it, and stacked a bottle of Gatorade, a towel, a thermometer, and a roll of paper towels beside the bed. I wasn't planning to use it, but if I started coughing, if I felt heat behind my eyes, I wanted a place to be away from anyone who might still be safe. I finished the night sitting in the dark with the radio on low. The host read out a new CDC statement that used the term novel hemorrhagic respiratory pathogen. Still no official name, no cause, just a description of what it did. It spread through droplets, possibly contact with infected fluids. Animals were being monitored. Monkeys in research settings were being isolated nationwide. Pet owners were told not to panic, but to avoid handling sick animals. One vet in the broadcast said dogs weren't likely carriers, but certain monkeys had shown violent behavior in labs under stress. I called my wife again around 10:45. She said the kids were asleep and everything still seemed normal where they were. No warnings, no alerts, no flight cancellations. I asked if she had any luck extending the hotel stay. She said yes. They'd managed to add a few more nights without issue. The new return flight was still set for next week. I reminded her not to wait in the lobby, not to use the elevators unless necessary, and to keep the kids occupied inside the room as much as possible. She said they'd been doing that all day already. I didn't tell her the newest symptoms being reported. I didn't think it would help. She sounded calm, a little tired, but not worried. I didn't want to change that yet. After the call ended, I double-checked the locks, wiped down the kitchen faucet, and sat in the living room without turning on the TV. I watched the wall for a while, thinking about how fast the shelves had emptied at the store. I must have fallen asleep sometime after 1, sitting upright in the armchair with my jacket still on. I woke up just after 6 to the sound of a garbage truck rumbling in the distance, then stopping, then idling for too long before moving again. I stood up, walked to the kitchen window, and watched it crawl past the far end of the block like it was behind schedule or missing half the crew. There were no new alerts on my phone that morning, but there were more headlines. I brewed coffee and stood at the counter scrolling through them one by one. 2 major networks were now running footage from inside emergency rooms, one in Houston, another in Boston. Both looked overwhelmed, not dramatic or staged, just tired. Hallways crowded with gurneys, nurses in goggles and raincoats. One clip showed a man on the floor convulsing near the entrance of a waiting room. His shirt was soaked in blood around the neck and shoulders. A paramedic tried to lift him, but he kept thrashing. Someone screamed in the background. Then the clip cut off. They weren't calling it a pandemic yet, but the framing had shifted. Anchors no longer used phrases like rumored illness or limited incidents. Now it was an emerging biological emergency. Cases had been reported in 14 states. Symptoms included fever, severe headache, blurred vision, bleeding from the eyes and nose, and rapid neurological decline. One reporter said the mortality rate was confirmed at over 50%. But when the network brought on a critical care doctor from Chicago, he didn't sugarcoat it. He said if you showed visible bleeding, you were already in a late stage, and survival at that point was highly unlikely. After that, I put the phone down, opened the blinds halfway, and just let the light come in without looking outside. I didn't want to check for cars. I didn't want to see the neighbors' windows and wonder who was still healthy. At 8:30, I got a group email from the department dean. Faculty were advised to adjust syllabi and reduce grading pressure. Students were being encouraged to return home if possible. Those unable to leave campus were asked to limit in-person movement. Buildings would begin switching to restricted access over the weekend. A second email came from the University Health Office about mental health resources and remote counseling services. It didn't mention the illness directly, but the wording made it clear things had escalated behind the scenes. That afternoon, I saw the first public advisory that included a warning about animals. A press release from the Columbus Police Department mentioned several calls involving unusual wildlife encounters near Whetstone Park and along the river trail. They described the behavior as erratic, uncharacteristically aggressive, and potentially dangerous to approach. One witness reported a raccoon lunging at pedestrians in daylight, while another described squirrels tearing at a bike seat and refusing to scatter when approached. That's not normal behavior, and while it didn't confirm any direct link to the illness, the timing felt off. The Columbus Zoo released its own statement around noon. They were closing immediately and transferring all non-essential staff off-site. It didn't specify what had triggered the move, but local radio mentioned that primate caretakers had reported unpredictable behavior and sudden vocalization changes in multiple species, not just monkeys, gorillas, lemurs, chimpanzees. They weren't sick, not visibly, but they were acting wrong. At that point, I pulled out a roll of painter's tape and started writing a checklist for the front door. It wasn't complicated, just a few steps I kept forgetting. Sanitize phone, sanitize keys, wash hands, wipe down shoes, glasses off, clean with alcohol. I stuck it right above the deadbolt, so I'd have to look at it every time I came in or out. That same hour, a friend from the biology department forwarded me a document labeled CDC Clinician Guidance, Preliminary Transmission Protocol. It hadn't been posted publicly yet, but he said it would be by evening. It confirmed droplet-based spread and possibly surface contamination through saliva or other fluids. It emphasized eye protection, hand hygiene, limited speaking in shared spaces, and basic decontamination practices after contact with high-touch surfaces. It wasn't official advice for the public yet, but it matched what the nurses in the hospital footage were already doing. After reading that, I opened a plastic bin I had stored in the closet and dug out a pair of old safety goggles from a home renovation kit. They weren't comfortable, but they sealed well. I added them to the pile I now kept by the front door. Mask, gloves, goggles, wipes. It felt like prepping for a chemical plant inspection, not a walk to the corner store. My email inbox had completely changed tone from 2 days ago. Students were no longer asking about papers. They were withdrawing, requesting deferrals, asking if they could take an incomplete and finish later. Some weren't even formal requests, just quick notes saying they had to go. One wrote, "I'm heading back to Vermont tonight. Don't think I'll finish this semester." Another said his family was driving down from Chicago and didn't know when they'd be back. I didn't argue with any of them. I responded with the same message each time. No problem. Health and safety come first. I'll mark you down as incomplete and we'll follow up when things stabilize. Be safe. I copied and pasted it at least 12 times that afternoon. By 4, the national coverage finally caught up to the tone of the situation. The network stopped debating whether this was overblown. They stopped showing graphs with curved lines and started showing full ER wings being cordoned off. One clip out of Charlotte showed a hallway being taped off by men in suits. Another, in San Diego, showed a nurse in tears explaining how fast the symptoms came on. She said patients were lucid 1 minute, unable to speak the next, and then bleeding from the face and ears within 2 hours. I didn't go to the store that day. I didn't want to risk it. Not until I saw what people were doing in person. Instead, I stayed inside and made a second inventory. This time I included water. I had 4 cases of bottled, plus the bathtub buckets, plus what I could draw from the tap while it still worked. I added dish soap, trash bags, gloves, goggles, and the makeshift isolation room to the list. I figured if things really got worse, I needed to be able to hand this list to someone else, or use it myself under pressure. Around 5:30, I called my wife again. She had just gotten an email from the airline offering to waive her change fee. I told her to take it and push the return date back further. I didn't care how long, just not now. Not while flights were still boarding without screening. She hesitated for a second, then agreed. Said she'd call in the morning and change it to something open-ended. The kids were fine. They'd been coloring and watching cartoons all afternoon. I asked if she had any trouble getting food. She said the hotel had closed its main dining room, but was doing room service for free. That was a relief. I told her to avoid anyone coughing. She laughed, not because it was funny, but because the advice was so obvious. Then she paused and asked quietly if I thought this thing was really happening. I didn't give her a direct answer. I said it didn't matter what I thought. I just wanted them to stay put until we knew more. She didn't push. She trusted me. By the time night fell, the city was still. I didn't hear a single car for over an hour. No sirens, no music, no skateboards or college kids on bikes. Just still air through the vent above the stove and the sound of my own shoes on the tile. I kept the windows closed, lights low. I sat in the kitchen and read the CDC guidelines twice, then printed them out and taped them next to the faucet. That night, I slept with the safety goggles and mask resting on the nightstand. I kept the lights off, but I left the hallway door open just wide enough to hear the front lock click if someone tried it. I didn't expect visitors. I just needed to know if anything crossed the threshold. It was only day 3, but everything already felt like it was shifting towards something permanent. People weren't reacting like this was temporary anymore. They weren't hoping it would go away. They were already making decisions for the long haul. By the time I stepped outside on the morning of day 4, it was obvious something had changed overnight. Not in the air or the weather, but in the way people moved. I left the house a few minutes after 8, heading to the grocery store with the full list I'd built over the past 2 days. I wore gloves, a mask, and the same set of safety goggles from yesterday. My old denim jacket went over a sweatshirt. It wasn't about warmth anymore. It was about having an outer layer I could strip off and leave on the porch after coming home. I took the longer route to the store so I could pass by the gun and hardware shop near 5th Avenue. It was already busy when I turned the corner. Not crowded, just lined up. At least 30 people outside, spaced out along the sidewalk, mostly men, but not all. I couldn't hear much through my mask, but I caught snippets. Words like 2 boxes per person, cash only, and no .223 left. A guy near the middle of the line held a coffee thermos in one hand and rested the other on the folded buttstock of a shotgun slung over his shoulder. He wasn't being threatening. Nobody was. But nobody was pretending this was normal either. When I got to the grocery store, the parking lot was already half full. The carts up front were gone, so I waited 5 minutes for someone to finish unloading one. Inside, the atmosphere was stripped down. No music playing. No samples, no small talk, just rubber soles on tile and carts scraping against the ends of the aisles. Every third shelf was partially bare, not completely cleaned out, but thinning fast. Canned soups were mostly gone. The pasta aisle was 2/3 empty. Rice was down to 3 bags, one of which I grabbed. Flour and sugar were untouched, probably because no one wanted to deal with baking. Water was rationed, 1 case per cart. Eggs, milk, and frozen pizza were picked over. Not gone, but if you were late, you'd miss out. Everyone moved quickly, quietly. Some wore masks, some didn't. A few people had rubber gloves. One man near the cleaning supplies had 2 small children in his cart, both wearing Halloween masks over their faces, probably the only thing their parents could find. At the checkout, the woman behind the plexiglass didn't speak except to give the total. The bagger was maybe 19 and had dark rings under his eyes. Nobody said thank you. Nobody talked about the weather. I got my bags, nodded, and left. Back home, I set up a routine I hadn't used before. I took off my jacket on the porch and laid it across the railing. I had already poured a shallow plastic tub of bleach solution and left it just outside the door. I stepped into it with both shoes, held there for 10 seconds, then dried them on a towel I wouldn't use again. I left the groceries on the mat and sprayed each package with diluted bleach before moving them inside. I washed my hands, wiped the counters, and only then did I sit down. I spent the next 2 hours grading. It felt pointless, but it gave my hands something to do. I tried to focus on a paper about early post-Civil War land redistribution policies, but I found myself rereading each paragraph twice before I could decide on a mark. My inbox kept pinging. More student withdrawals, more excuses, more requests to delay work or take an incomplete. I said yes to every one of them. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a local news alert. A probable case had been identified in Franklin County. The report came from a regional clinic, not a major hospital. No names. Just confirmation that a patient exhibiting classic signs of systemic hemorrhagic collapse had been transported to an isolation unit overnight. The footage showed a line of EMS personnel taping off a side entrance with yellow biohazard markers. The reporter kept her distance. She wore goggles. Within the hour, Ohio State's emergency office issued a second update. All campus events, lectures, group study sessions, and in-person services were suspended, effective immediately. Dining halls would continue to operate on a pickup-only basis. Library hours were reduced to essential operations only. 1 librarian per shift, maximum of 10 patrons, and masks required at all times. The email ended with a short line in bold. Students who are able to safely leave campus are encouraged to do so. That was the first time I saw the university give up the idea of holding everyone in place. Before, it had been guidance. Now it was an open door. I checked in on 3 of my international students who had already emailed me earlier in the week. All 3 were still on campus. 1 was from Malaysia, 1 from Nigeria, 1 from France. The borders were a mess, and their return flights had either been cancelled or pushed indefinitely. I asked if they had food and a working place to stay. They said yes, but admitted that options were shrinking. Dining halls were slower. Dorm hall staff were dropping off. Common areas were mostly closed. I didn't offer anything large. I couldn't, but I packed up a bag with one of my extra rice sacks, a jar of peanut butter, and a few canned vegetables. I drove it to their dorm and left it outside the entrance with their names on a note. Then I texted them that it was there and waited by the parking lot until I saw someone come down and take it. No handshake, no lecture, just waved and drove off. By mid-afternoon, the animal rumors kicked up again, this time more local. A neighborhood Facebook group screenshot circulated showing someone claiming their neighbor's dog had gone feral after the owners started showing symptoms. The post claimed the dog lunged at another pet and had to be put down. No photo, no confirmation, but it spread fast. Within an hour, people were tagging animal control and city officials demanding action. The city finally released a statement just before sunset. It said there was no current evidence of animal-to-human transmission via domestic pets, but also advised caution. Sick or erratically behaving animals should be reported to authorities and not approached directly. That's all it said. No denial, no reassurance, just a warning. That was enough for some people to start panicking. Pet shelters saw a spike in drop-offs. A friend of mine who volunteers at one near Dublin said they received 12 surrenders in 3 hours, all citing potential infection risk as the reason. The shelter put out a desperate call for fosters and posted a video reminding people not to abandon animals. I shared the link, but I didn't know if it helped. Later that evening, I called a former student of mine, Derek, who now works nights at Mount Carmel East. I hadn't heard from him in a while, but I figured if anyone knew what was happening inside hospitals, it would be someone like him. He picked up on the third ring and sounded exhausted. He said the ER had stopped admitting walk-ins that morning and was triaging patients from ambulances only. He mentioned that every other call was now suspicious for the infection. Nosebleeds that wouldn't stop, high fevers, patients fainting in driveways. I asked if he had seen it up close. He paused for a long time before saying yes, then added, "They don't go quiet. That's what makes it worse. They get louder before they crash." I didn't press him after that. I just told him to stay safe, then ended the call and stood in the middle of the kitchen trying to decide what I was still missing. I pulled out my bleach bottle and made a new batch of diluted mix, 1 part bleach, 4 parts water, and poured it into a plastic tray just outside the back door. That was now my official re-entry point. Every trip out would end there. Foot bath, glove removal, phone wipe, glasses clean, no exceptions. From now on, I decided, no one enters the house. No visitors. No exceptions. Any deliveries go to the porch. Any handoffs happen from 6 feet away. If I need to meet someone, it happens through a closed window or standing at the edge of the walkway. I taped that policy next to the front checklist and made a note to bring it up with my elderly neighbor tomorrow. That night, for the first time, I saw people on the street who weren't just walking. A man passed by on foot with 2 duffel bags and a long cardboard box, the kind a rifle might come in. He wasn't running. He didn't look scared. But he moved like someone who didn't plan to stop. An hour later, I saw another group walking west, 2 adults and a teenager, all carrying full packs. No pets, no strollers, just gear. When I checked the city scanner feed, I saw multiple reports of fights at convenience stores and a stabbing incident outside a pharmacy. The police dispatcher kept saying, "Units unavailable," and "Advise caller to remain indoors." That phrase repeated 3 times in less than 5 minutes. By morning, I wasn't tired. I was wired in the wrong way. Alert, but not clear. I boiled water for instant coffee and left the windows closed, even though it was warming up outside. The smell of bleach lingered from the footbath at the door. I kept the radio off. Too much noise. Instead, I sat with a notepad and tried to list the things I was running low on. I had enough food for a week, maybe more if I stretched it. But bleach, isopropyl alcohol, trash bags, gloves, those were slipping. My supply of fresh vegetables was down to 2 carrots and a half-wilted head of lettuce. I checked my delivery apps to see if I could place an order for pickup. The home screen had changed overnight. There was a red warning banner across the top that read, "Service delays expected. Due to high demand, many stores have suspended home delivery. Pickup only where available." Below that, the list of local stores showed a patchwork of options. Most groceries listed unavailable for delivery. A few had next-day pickup windows, but only for limited items, mostly pet food and boxed snacks. The few couriers still online had price multipliers. One store charged an $80 delivery fee for a single 10-mile trip. I stared at the screen and tried to decide whether paying 3 times normal cost for cleaning supplies made sense. Then I clicked away. I texted a former student who used to work at a grocery distribution warehouse over near Grandview. He had mentioned it once during office hours last semester when writing a paper on labor strikes. I asked if it was still open. He didn't answer right away. When he finally replied, all he said was, "They're still moving stuff, but no one's talking. They're short-staffed. Half the guys aren't showing up." I decided to try anyway. I packed a cloth bag with a change of gloves, my goggles, cash, about 200 in mixed bills, and a short printed list of what I needed: bleach, garbage bags, hand soap, disinfectant wipes, and canned goods. I added peanut butter and dry pasta to the bottom just in case someone was willing to swap. When I pulled into the lot at the warehouse, there were only a handful of trucks left. Some employees moved skids out through a side entrance, watching me with quiet suspicion. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I walked slow, hands visible, staying well clear of the door. I waited near the loading bay until one of them, maybe late 20s, walked up and asked what I wanted. I told him I wasn't looking to cause trouble. I just needed to restock a few things I couldn't find in stores. I said I could pay in cash and didn't mind if the packaging was damaged. He looked over my shoulder, probably checking for cameras or cops. Then he told me to wait. He came back 6 minutes later with 2-gallon jugs of bleach, a half-crushed box of nitrile gloves, and a wrapped bundle of heavy-duty trash bags. I handed him 100 and didn't ask for change. He didn't say thank you, just nodded once and walked off. That was enough. Back at home, I unpacked slowly, and disinfected everything before bringing it inside. Then I burned the gloves, left my jacket hanging in the sun, and scrubbed my hands twice. I added the new supplies to my makeshift corner shelves and updated my inventory notes. My system was starting to look more like something you'd see in a mobile clinic. That afternoon, the federal government finally stepped up with a full press briefing. It aired on every major network and came with a clean blue background, a podium, and 3 people standing in masks behind it. The lead speaker, someone from the Department of Health and Human Services, said the virus was now confirmed to transmit primarily through airborne droplets. Face coverings were officially recommended, not just optional. Symptomatic individuals were urged to stay home. Household members were told to isolate from the sick. Schools, if not already closed, were encouraged to transition online immediately. Then came the contradiction. A state official, standing 6 feet to the right, made a point to say that healthy individuals with strong immune systems were unlikely to experience severe illness. He said it twice. The federal side didn't respond to that. The camera cut away before any questions were taken. The confusion didn't help. That night, the same clip of the contradictory guidance was already making the rounds online, with split-screen reactions. Some people mocked it. Others used it to justify ignoring safety guidelines. One woman in a live stream said she wasn't going to breathe through a diaper because a state rep said healthy people would be fine. The comments section exploded. Meanwhile, an investigative segment out of Germany aired on international news. It showed leaked footage from a cargo facility overseas, exact location unclear, where screaming macaques were locked in steel cages. Some of them had blood along their snouts. The handlers wore full body suits and face shields. The audio picked up what sounded like alarm klaxons in the background. The clip only ran for 12 seconds before it cut out. Commentators argued about whether it was terrorism or a research accident. The origin was still unclear. The debate was sterile. What mattered was that it didn't look fake. The footage added fuel to everything that had been simmering. Suddenly, people weren't just afraid of humans. They were afraid of everything with eyes. Dogs, cats, birds. One vet clinic shut down entirely after 2 staff members got sick. Local posts spread rumors that wildlife near the Scioto River had started clustering in unnatural groups. No one confirmed it, but it didn't matter. People started carrying pepper spray just to walk to their cars. I needed to focus on something else, so I recorded a short video lecture for my students. It wasn't formal. I didn't bother with lighting or editing. Just sat in front of my desk, hit record, and spoke plainly about the 1918 influenza response. How cities that acted early saw fewer deaths. How masking wasn't politicized back then because survival wasn't political. I gave a short reading list and assigned a reflection piece. I told them not to worry about grades. Just stay sharp, write honestly, and submit something when they could. I ended the video by saying I was still here, still teaching, and that the class would continue as long as I had power and internet. The view counter ticked slowly upward throughout the evening. A few students commented thank you. One said his parents were sick and he didn't know what to do. I messaged him privately and told him to focus on them, not the class. That night, I left the porch light off. I heard shouting 2 streets over. Couldn't make out the words. A car sped down the avenue around midnight and didn't slow at the intersection. I lay in bed with the goggles and mask within reach, and a printed map of the neighborhood next to the flashlight in the drawer. I wasn't expecting the worst, but I was finished pretending things would get better tomorrow. Morning came slower. I stayed in bed until after 7, listening. There were sirens again. First responders moving towards something, but with no urgency in the tone. Just presence. I got up, checked the front door, and opened it slowly. Nothing looked out of place, but I could smell something faint in the air, burnt plastic or rubber. The wind wasn't strong, but it carried whatever it was from a few blocks west. I made a new list at breakfast. Not a grocery list. Those were almost pointless now. This one was about behavior, a new routine. Every envelope or package that came through the mailbox would stay on the porch for a minimum of 4 hours before being brought inside. Anything cardboard would be handled with gloves, sprayed down, and opened with a separate knife I wouldn't use for food. Mail would go straight to a holding bin near the door. Keys and phone would get wiped with bleach after every outing. Nothing came in without a step-down process. I printed the checklist and taped it next to the bleach tray by the back door. Mid-morning, I drove past the sporting goods store off Olentangi. I didn't plan to stop. I just wanted to see what it looked like. A convoy of pickups was already lined up at the entrance. Not a few cars. 8 or 9 trucks idling with their lights on and engines running. One had a flag zip-tied to the bed rail. A few people stood outside their vehicles, arms folded, waiting for the place to open. One man, maybe in his 50s, already had a dolly cart strapped to the back of his pickup. When the doors opened at 9, they moved quick. I watched them roll out with boxes stacked high, cases of ammunition, propane tanks, water jugs, large coolers, folding stoves. Some paid in cash, others scanned their phones. No one talked much. Back in my neighborhood, the tension was finally showing. 2 people were arguing over a parking spot in front of the duplex down the street. A woman, early 40s maybe, yelled something about blocking her line of sight. The man she was yelling at stood still, holding a brown paper bag, not answering. A third person came out of the building and told them to both move. The fight didn't escalate, but no one backed down either. It ended with both cars staying exactly where they were. At the corner store near the university, a man coughed while waiting in line. Not loud, not dramatic, just a regular cough. 3 people around him stepped away fast, like he had drawn a weapon. He held up his hands and said he was fine, that it was allergies. But the line shifted and someone shouted from the back that he should go wait in his car. The cashier froze, unsure what to do. The man eventually left without buying anything. The campus sent out another all-faculty update. They were asking instructors to keep all communication asynchronous. No live sessions. No mandatory group discussions. The wording was subtle, but the message was clear. They didn't expect things to improve in time for anything live. I pushed another set of readings online, with a short paragraph encouraging students to pace themselves. I added a note that late submissions would be accepted indefinitely. The fewer stress points, the better. That afternoon, a press statement from 2 regional hospitals asked for blood donations. They needed plasma, platelets, anything that could help offset losses during emergency care. They made sure to clarify that only asymptomatic individuals should come in, with appointments scheduled ahead of time. I read it twice, then I closed the page. I didn't go. The risk wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't about what might happen. I'd seen what already was. Too many unknowns. Too many people crowding waiting rooms. I knew my blood type wasn't rare. My donation could wait. Instead, I found a local relief fund accepting digital payments for frontline staff. I sent $50 anonymously and shut down the app. As the day stretched into late afternoon, police sirens began to pick up again. Not in waves, but consistently, every 15 minutes, then every 10, then 2 overlapping at once. Most headed north or west. I kept the windows closed and wrote timestamps in a notebook every time one passed. By the time the sun started to drop, I had logged 14. Then came the first gunshot. Single round, somewhere east of here. Not far, no follow-up, no shouts. Just one sharp report, then nothing. 10 minutes later, another. This one closer. I didn't flinch. I just grabbed my flashlight, checked the back door lock again, and made sure the bleach tray was fresh. At 7:32 p.m., I saw my first ambulance in the neighborhood. It didn't use its siren, just rolled slowly toward the house 2 doors down, where the elderly man with the grey beard lived alone. The back door opened and 2 EMTs in partial suits, plastic face shields, gloves and gowns, stepped out. One of them brought a stretcher halfway to the porch before stepping back and waiting. A few minutes passed before someone helped the man outside. He wasn't walking straight. His body looked heavy, like every step took effort. I couldn't see clearly from where I stood behind my curtain, but I caught something on his face. Blood maybe, along the cheek and near the collar. He was shaking. He sat down too fast and one of the medics caught him. They strapped him in quickly and rolled the stretcher inside. They didn't turn on the siren when they left. They just drove off, slowly. Half an hour later, I watched a man collapse near the intersection across from the church. I didn't know him. He was walking fast, arms moving like he was trying to keep momentum. Then he stopped and jerked sideways, stumbling into the street. I thought he was having a seizure at first, but then he started hitting himself. Repeatedly, his hands slammed against his chest and legs, then up near his face. He dropped to his knees and kept going. Someone nearby shouted. A car stopped. I couldn't see who ran over, but two people tried to help him. One of them kept their distance, pacing in a circle. The other moved in and grabbed his arms, trying to pull him up. Then the man screamed. A raw, violent sound. He kept slamming his fists against the ground even as the person tried to hold him still. No ambulance came, at least not while I was watching. Eventually the scene broke apart. The man on the ground went limp. The others stepped back. I didn't see anyone get up again. That night the air felt heavier, humid, even though the sky was clear. I shut every window. I taped a strip of plastic over the exhaust vent above the stove and added another towel along the back door threshold. I didn't trust airflow anymore, not if this thing lingered. I sat down and wrote a single line in my notebook before bed. Too many sounds, not enough help. I woke up on day 7 to a kitchen that smelled like old bleach and reheated rice. The light from the east-facing window was too bright. I left the curtain half closed and let the house stay dim. I moved slowly, and not because I was tired. Something in the pace of everything had shifted again. Less adrenaline, more resignation. The water was still running, electricity still on, my modem light still blinking. I boiled water, poured a cup of coffee, and opened my laptop without turning on the news. I went straight to the local health department's dashboard. The numbers were still unconfirmed for most regions, but the graph lines weren't trending horizontally anymore. Columbus reported a full transition of all critical care units to emergency overflow. Franklin County had at least 4 major hospitals in what they called sustained surge status. That meant no empty ICU beds. That meant ambulance triage in the parking lot. That meant people dying without ever getting inside. I skimmed the headlines. The White House held another press briefing late the night before. The federal response team blamed the states for slow reporting. Governors fired back that test kits had been promised and never arrived. There was footage of a cargo plane parked at an airport in New Jersey, with pallets of sealed boxes marked BPE behind locked fencing. The reporter said none of it had moved in 3 days. No one at the warehouse had answers. Airlines started issuing notices around 10 a.m. Transatlantic routes were being cancelled with no clear restart dates. Not just Europe, parts of South America and Southeast Asia were also affected. One map showed red flight paths thinning to a web of short local arcs. No international returns, no new departures, only emergencies, and only with government authorization. I called my wife as soon as I saw the news. It rang 6 times before she picked up. The signal quality was worse than usual. There was a delay on the line. She said she'd seen the same alert. Their return flight, already pushed back once, was now cancelled. No refund, just a credit. She sounded calm, no panic. She said the kids were doing homework on the hotel bed and that the staff had started limiting housekeeping. They were only getting clean towels every 2 days, and food was drop-off only. She was wearing a mask every time she opened the door and had started wiping down takeout containers before letting the kids touch anything. I told her not to go anywhere. No museums, no markets, no taxis. She agreed. She said they had enough supplies to last the week and that the front desk had handed out small disinfectant bottles to each room. I wanted to believe that would hold. I didn't press. I just told her to stay inside and keep the curtains closed. I didn't say why. She already understood. After the call, I walked the perimeter of the house for the 3rd time that week. Nothing out of place. Trash bins still upright. No new graffiti or break-ins nearby. But I saw more mail left to pile on porches. More houses dark in the middle of the day. One sedan across the street hadn't moved in 4 days. I walked back inside and locked the door behind me like I was sealing an airlock. I spent the rest of the morning cooking, not for a specific meal, just preparing. I boiled a large batch of rice, added beans, onion, and spices, and portioned the mix into 6 freezer containers. They stacked neatly into the bottom rack next to the last 2 bags of frozen broccoli. I rotated the drinking water jugs, refilling what I could and setting reminders to boil again in 3 days just to be sure. It was almost noon when I turned the TV on again. I left the volume low. The first thing I heard was an interview already in progress. A nurse from an ICU ward in Cleveland. She looked exhausted, face mask pulled down just long enough for the camera shot. She described patients coming in with conjunctival bleeding, confusion, and sudden muscle seizures. Some collapsed in the lobby. Others lost the ability to speak within hours. One had clawed at his own face during a seizure and had to be restrained. She kept talking, and the anchor's face changed. Half a second before the feed cut, you could see the anchor glance off camera. Then it jumped to a commercial break. Not a word of transition, just silence and a jingle for bot. I turned it off. That afternoon, I cleaned the front porch with a stronger bleach mix. Not because anyone had walked on it, but because it gave me something physical to do. I hosed down the entry mat, sprayed the mail slot, and replaced the old footbath with a fresh tray. When I stood up, I realized how long it had been since I'd spoken to someone in person. Not a text, not a phone call, just voice, face to face. I debated walking to my neighbor's house to check on her, the woman I gave rice to last week, but I stopped myself. If she needed something, she would call. She had my number. Unnecessary contact, even with good intentions, was still a risk. I left a bag of apples on her porch with a note, then stepped back, knocked once, and walked away without waiting. Later that evening, the city sent out a notice that all public schools were closed indefinitely. The message came with a link to online resources and a soft promise that classes would continue in a reduced capacity using digital platforms. But everyone knew what it meant. Schools were done for the year. That night, while logging off my email, I saw one last clip making the rounds. Footage from a Canadian border checkpoint where a family tried to drive south in an RV. The guards stopped them at the line. The father stepped out and argued. The mother held a piece of paper against the window. A child cried inside. The video didn't show the end, just the standoff. One family trapped between 2 countries, unable to move in either direction. When I woke up, the first thing I checked wasn't the news. It was the light switches. The power still worked. The refrigerator hummed like normal. My phone had charged fully overnight. I turned on the faucet and watched the water run. It was clean, strong. I filled 2 jugs just in case and shut it off. The grid was holding, for now. But the internet felt thinner, slower. Pages stalled more often than usual, and some major news sites returned server errors. I opened Reddit, not the front page, but the subreddits that tracked everything unofficial, the ones that had posted early warnings back when the virus first leaked. The forums were chaotic. Anonymous accounts were reporting real-time updates from hospitals and emergency response centers, claiming the actual mortality rate wasn't 50% or even 70%. Some insisted it was closer to 90%. They said internal CDC documents described 3 distinct phases: exposure, latency, and neurological decline. The first 2 passed fast, within 48 hours. The third either meant death or a rapid coma followed by death. No long-term recovery data. No confirmed survivors once the bleeding started. The worst part? These weren't random usernames. They linked to images, badges, hospital charts, things that looked real. I sat for a long time just watching the comments refresh. Entire districts in parts of Asia were locked down. Roadblocks. Military vehicles parked outside suburbs. France had rerouted all domestic travel through emergency checkpoints. Australia shut down its northern border to internal traffic. No trucks, no trains, just airlifted medical supply chains. Most of it wasn't being reported on television, not yet. Around 9, I realized I hadn't heard from my wife in almost a full day. No messages overnight. No check-in that morning. I tried calling twice. Both went to voicemail. I sent a message asking if she could still access Wi-Fi from the hotel or if the connection had gone down. I waited 10 minutes, pacing the hallway. Then I wrote again and asked if she thought it was worth switching to a private house. Something short-term and quiet, away from foot traffic. I told her I'd cover whatever it cost. I said it might be safer than a building with 100 guests and only one exit. I didn't get a reply that morning. Not a call. Not even a message received indicator. Just silence. In the background, national news caught up to what the forums had been warning about. A congressional hearing had taken place the night before, and by morning, clips were circulating online. Politicians shouting over one another, accusing federal departments of withholding early reports from international partners. One woman read a timeline into the record showing that monkeys from an overseas research shipment were held in US customs for nearly 48 hours with missing health documentation. Another man interrupted, claiming there was no proven link between those animals and the current outbreak. The hearing dissolved into a stream of contradictions. Some demanded immediate nationwide lockdown. Others claimed containment zones were unconstitutional. One representative said the military had been preparing to activate urban quarantine protocols. Another said that was fear-mongering. No plan came out of the session. Meanwhile, a warehouse video surfaced from somewhere in the Midwest. Unmarked facility, probably food or animal processing. The footage showed rows of crates with dead macaques inside. Some of the animals looked partially decomposed. Others appeared frozen in contorted postures, mouths wide open. The crates weren't sealed properly. At least 3 were overturned. One man walked through the scene with a phone flashlight, whispering that this was the origin point. Cable networks aired the clip with warnings not to jump to conclusions. Experts said there could be dozens of explanations. That macaques often died in transport. That improper storage wasn't proof of viral connection, but nobody was listening anymore. The image of the dead monkeys inside those crates had already locked itself into the public's mind. Local impact followed fast. A veterinary clinic on the east side of Columbus shut down abruptly after 2 of their techs fell ill within 24 hours of each other. The clinic released a brief statement saying it was for safety reasons and pending decontamination, but people online immediately started posting that the building had been emptied by hazmat crews. I couldn't confirm it. I didn't need to. In the park near Lane Avenue, a group of residents had continued feeding the stray cat population, ignoring the growing warnings. I saw them during my walk back from the pharmacy. 6 adults crouched near the old gazebo, leaving tins of tuna and dry food near the benches. Most were quiet, focused, but one kid, maybe 6 or 7, ran too close to a stray dog sniffing at the pile. The dog didn't bark. It snapped, fast, loud, clipped the kid's jacket near the elbow. Adults shouted. One of them yanked the child back by the hood. The dog ran off. No blood, no wound, but the kid screamed like he'd been shot. 2 of the adults yelled at the group to stop feeding wild animals. The others shouted back. I didn't stay. I walked straight home and locked the door. By evening, official statements said utilities were secure, power grids holding, water treatment facilities fully staffed. The city website said there was no indication of service disruption in the foreseeable future. But the phrasing bothered me. It felt like a placeholder, a reassurance written for a script, not for the truth. I boiled a kettle and left the steam rising in the bathroom before taking a shower. It was something I hadn't done before, a half measure, some leftover advice I had read during flu season years ago. Steam loosening up sinuses, clearing the air. I knew it wouldn't do anything for this virus, but I did it anyway. While I waited for the water to heat, I stood in the hallway and caught myself staring at the list by the front door. I started thinking about making another, something more personal. Not supply counts, not bleach instructions. Something for whoever might come after if I didn't make it. I didn't write it yet, just thought about where I'd leave it. I stayed up late again, refreshing my inbox, waiting for a message from my wife. Nothing. I clicked through old photos on my phone. The last one was from their second day at the hotel. A blurry shot of the kids eating room service on the bed, laughing at something off camera. She had sent it without comment. I stared at it for a long time before turning off the screen. The helicopters woke me before dawn. Not the distant hum that you half ignore in the background, but the low, circling thrum of rotors hanging heavy over the city. The sound shook the windows in their frames. I pulled the curtain back an inch and saw two of them moving slow, crossing each other's flight paths as spotlights traced over rooftops. It made no sense. Why use spotlights in daylight? Unless they weren't just watching. Unless they were making sure we all knew they were there. At 7 a.m., an official alert pinged on every phone in the house. I didn't even have to read mine, because the same robotic voice came through the radio and the television at the same time. Mandatory citywide curfew in effect beginning tonight. 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. residents are required to remain indoors. Non-essential movement is prohibited. The message repeated twice, then cut to static. The broadcast news filled in the rest. The National Guard had moved into the state fairgrounds overnight and set up a command post. They weren't patrolling every street, not yet, but the convoy footage was already online. Humvees driving down High Street, troops in goggles and masks standing on the platforms of open trucks. Their rifles were slung forward, not shouldered, but visible enough to leave no doubt. By 9, the city felt different. Thinner. The traffic noise was gone. The grocery near High Street announced reduced hours, from 10 to 2. I walked over just before 11. The shelves were half stripped. Bread gone, milk gone. The entire aisle of over-the-counter medicine was empty, except for 2 boxes of cough drops and children's vitamins. At the checkout, the clerk told me it was his last shift. His family was leaving that night for Tennessee, hoping to get south before more roadblocks went up. He said it casually, like someone mentioning a vacation, but his eyes never stopped scanning the entrance. When I got back, my phone was buzzing. It was the daughter of my elderly neighbor, the woman who had given me her number earlier in the week. She lived 2 streets away and said she hadn't been able to reach her mother all morning. She'd tried calling, texting, nothing. Roadblocks had already gone up on her side of town, and she couldn't get through. She asked if I could check in person. I walked over slowly, hands bare but goggles on. The street was quiet. I knocked 3 times at her door and waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Through the front window I could just make out the shape of her on the couch, slumped to one side. Not moving. I called her name once, through the glass. No response. I didn't go inside. I couldn't risk it. I called her daughter back and told her the truth. That her mother was unresponsive. That I couldn't confirm more than that. She went silent for a long time, then said she would call emergency services. 20 minutes later, an ambulance arrived. The EMTs wore full protective gear, plastic gowns, double gloves, and clear face shields that caught the sunlight. They moved slowly. No rush. No urgency. Just procedure. They went inside with a stretcher and came out with a zipped black bag. They loaded it into the van and drove away without the siren. I stood at the edge of my driveway watching them go. For the first time, it hit me that I might never see another neighbor alive again. The rest of the afternoon folded into a blur of noise. Gunfire broke out 2 blocks away around 3 o'clock. 4 sharp reports, one after the other. Then, silence. 10 minutes later, I saw smoke rising above the trees near the gas station. Word spread fast through neighborhood texts and posts. A convenience store had been looted. The owner tried to resist. Someone shot him. No one knew if he survived. People said police hadn't come. Others said they arrived late and left without making arrests. Nobody trusted any version. My phone buzzed again at 5 p.m. A message from Derek, my former student at Mount Carmel. His words came in uneven bursts, like he was typing between calls. ER collapsing. Too many cases. Staff walking out. Don't come here if you get sick. No room left. I read it 3 times, staring at the screen. That was the first time anyone had said it so directly, that the hospitals weren't just strained, they were finished. By sunset, the city was already shutting down. Streets emptied earlier than usual. Porch lights clicked on across the block, but blinds stayed closed. The air felt heavier. Sirens came in waves but never stopped. The curfew began at 9 sharp. At 9:30, the guard convoy rolled past. 2 trucks, 1 Humvee. Soldiers in goggles and masks scanned the houses as they went. Their rifles weren't raised, but one of them pointed directly at my streetlight, as if marking the area. I shut off my own lights and stood back from the window. I stayed there for a long time, not moving, watching the last sliver of daylight vanish behind the rooftops. The sound of the convoy faded, leaving the street in a strange, hollow quiet. No kids playing, no car engines, no music leaking from apartments, just nothing. I pulled the curtain closed and turned the lock on the front door twice, even though it was already locked. When I woke the next morning, the light coming through the blinds was dim and grey, as if the day itself had decided to stay muted. My phone buzzed twice with the same automated message from the state. Stay indoors, curfew extended, only essential movement permitted. The wording had changed again. Required had become permitted. It was no longer a suggestion, it was law. I filled a kettle and set it on the stove, glancing at the power outlet. The light on the surge protector flickered once before stabilizing. I had never noticed it flicker before. I poured the hot water over instant coffee and carried the mug to the living room, where the television already showed a muted press conference. The scroll bar across the bottom read, "Federal response escalates, full lockdown ordered." The footage cut to a map. Red blocks covered entire states, not just cities. Airports closed, highway checkpoints activated, buses and trains suspended, international flights halted except for medical and military cargo. A new phrase appeared at the bottom of the screen, critical supply corridors. No one explained what those were. I tried to call my wife again. This time, the call didn't even ring. A recorded voice said the number was unreachable at this time. I hung up and tried again. Same result. I opened the messaging app and typed a short note. "Please check in. Even a single word. I need to know you're okay." I hit send and waited. The checkmark never appeared. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, and heard a sound outside. Boots on pavement. Slow, measured. I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. 2 soldiers walked past in full gear, masks on, rifles at low ready. They weren't looking at houses. They were looking at the ground, scanning for something invisible. One of them stopped, knelt, and sprayed a line of orange paint across the curb. Then they both kept walking. At mid-morning, the grid blinked for the first time. A short, sharp power cut. The lights dimmed. The fridge compressor clicked off. The modem light went black. 5 seconds later, everything came back. The hum of the fridge returned like a held breath released. I checked my phone. No data. The Wi-Fi showed a weak signal but no connection. I tried 3 times to refresh a news site. Nothing. Then, slowly it came back, but only text. No images. I wrote down the time in my notebook. 10:42 a.m. First grid hiccup. Then I started filling every empty container in the house with water. Saucepans, mixing bowls, even the old cooler from the garage. I didn't know how long the system would hold, but I wasn't going to wait for an official notice to prepare. Around noon, I heard shouting from down the block. Not panicked shouting, angry. I stepped onto the porch but stayed behind the screen door. 2 men were arguing in the middle of the street about a car parked across both driveways. One of them had a baseball bat, the other a broom handle. Neither swung, but both were gripping their weapons tight. A soldier in a Humvee rolled slowly past. He didn't stop. He didn't even look at them. The argument fizzled after a few minutes, but the car stayed where it was. By early afternoon, the hospitals had stopped issuing public updates. Local news anchors filled time with recycled footage from previous days. A crawler at the bottom of the screen said, All non-emergency admissions suspended. Another line said, telehealth recommended for mild symptoms. They didn't mention what to do if telehealth didn't answer. Then a clip appeared, a leaked recording of an ICU nurse from Detroit talking to someone off camera. She described patients arriving already bleeding from the eyes and ears, unable to stand, some convulsing so violently they broke bones. She said staff were restraining people with straps because sedatives weren't working. She said the smell in the wards was like copper and disinfectant. The anchor's expression stayed neutral, but the feed cut mid-sentence. The screen jumped to a state press briefing about community volunteerism. I shut the TV off and went to the kitchen. I cooked a second large pot of rice and beans, adding chopped canned vegetables and dividing everything into freezer containers. I stacked them in the freezer and labeled them with masking tape. Next to them, I lined up the drinking water jugs I had rotated earlier. My pantry looked like a supply closet now. Neat, organized, ready. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain just enough to see. The street was almost completely still. Only one car passed in an hour. No kids, no joggers. Even the stray animals had vanished. The only movement came from a single delivery truck that parked 2 houses down. The driver jumped out wearing a hood and gloves, dropped a box on the porch, rang the bell with his elbow, and sprinted back to the truck. He peeled off without looking back. I tried my wife again. No response. This time I sent a different message. If you can't call, just send a single blank text. Anything. Nothing came. The screen stayed empty. At 3 p.m., the power flickered again. This time it stayed off for almost a full minute. When it came back, the modem light blinked red before turning green. My phone displayed emergency calls only. I wrote down the time again. 3:07 p.m. grid unstable. By late afternoon, an official announcement came through a scratchy radio broadcast. Residents are advised to prepare for intermittent outages. Backup generation systems are engaged. Water service remains stable. The voice was flat, as if reading a script. No inflection, no emotion. That evening, I heard an engine revving hard down the street. I opened the blinds just enough to see. A black SUV sped past the checkpoint at the corner and crashed into a parked sedan. 2 soldiers ran toward it, rifles raised. The driver stumbled out coughing, hands held high, blood on his shirt. One soldier ordered him down. The other circled behind. The man collapsed on the asphalt, convulsing. The soldiers didn't touch him. They called something into their radios and stepped back. A third vehicle arrived with a stretcher. The man was loaded up without a siren and taken away. The soldiers left the wrecked cars blocking the street. I backed away from the window and sat on the floor. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, but I let it go until it stopped on its own. The smell of metal and boiled water filled the air. As darkness fell, the grid cut for the 3rd time. This time, it stayed off for over 5 minutes. The hum of the fridge died. The heater fan stopped. The house went completely silent except for the faint sound of distant helicopters. I lit one of my emergency candles and set it on the table, its flame too weak to light the room but enough to mark the space. When the power returned, my phone vibrated once with a new notification. It wasn't from my wife. It was an automated government alert. Due to increased instability, residents are urged to stay indoors and conserve energy. Curfew remains in effect. Do not approach checkpoints. I closed my eyes and thought about the last time my family and I had been in the same room. 4 days before they left for the wedding. The kids arguing over which movie to watch. My wife asking me to turn off the news for once. The kitchen still warm from dinner. That was the last normal night. Then I shut off every light, locked every door, and sat by the window in the dark, waiting for the next flicker. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.